Rise from your grave.
You are watching Otero Studios.
Welcome back to another video. It's Sal. This is issue number 1 of the R.A.W podcast with the Art Sensei. Real artist at work. This is more about my inspiration. I get a lot of inspiration from a lot of things. So, martial arts, comic books, video games. One of my biggest inspirations growing up, obviously, is Castlevania. But another one here, and the reason why I chose this Vega piece to do the voiceover on, was Street Fighter. In the early 90s, one of the first systems I ever got was a Super Nintendo. I had a Game Boy, but the Game Boy was more just waste time, play Tetris and stuff like that. When I first got a Super Nintendo, the first game that I got with it was Street Fighter 2, and I remember vividly because for my birthday I got my parents actually got almost the whole family to come over and hang out. And I remember just a bunch of people taking turns on my Super Nintendo, and I barely got to play. So my very first memory of Street Fighter was trying to get a turn to play my own system. But that was just because it was a lot of family members, Hispanic. So I have like a million cousins. So that was kind of like my first memory. But I remember once I got a chance to play it, I didn't stop playing it. My brother and I, we would share systems, and a couple months later we got the Sega Genesis, and I kind of fell out of playing Super Nintendo, and then I got the tournament edition for the Sega maybe a year or two later, and so it reignited my love for Street Fighter. I played it at arcades, and that's the thing, is a lot of kids nowadays, I don't think they realize how important arcades were to, early pre-teens and teenagers, especially, moms weren't like helicopter moms, kind of like how they are now. My parents would just leave me and my brother at the mall, and we'd just hang out at this arcade called Timeout. And it was a lot of fun because some of the friends I made at the arcade I'm still friends with today, like my buddy Orlando, Tony, just people locally that we just made lifelong friendships just from being at the arcade. So back to the inspiration. But yeah, once I got really good at Street Fighter, my cousin Joey's always been better than me. I would always try and draw the characters. Eventually Sega, I started playing Eternal Champions, and I've always been a huge fighting game guy until Symphony of the Night came out, and then I really started kind of delving into more platformers and Metroidvania style games, but what really got me into gaming was fighting games. So that's why on the channel you'll see, I have that martial arts month. I've been doing it every March, I believe. And it's just, I try to do video game characters, real life martial artists, and just do a whole month about martial arts and martial arts centric characters. Today I wanted to put Vega up. I was trying to save these for martial arts month, but I just loved how Vega came out, and I wanted to share the video early on. And plus, there's so many other Street Fighter characters that I do want to draw in sketch card form, so I eventually could do a video about it. But that's my main inspiration in the video game world and comic book world. It's The Flash, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and then the Dragon Ball Z manga. There was also a comic. I wouldn't call it a comic. It was more of a graphic novel that was out mid 90s, late 90s, that I was really, really into. It was about Musashi, the samurai who fought with a wooden sword. but it was based on that character, and it was called Vagabond. And the creator is called Inoue. He's very popular now. I mean, if I showed a clip or a picture, which I'll show here in the video, it's very iconic image. You know, his art style is everywhere now, but it blew my mind because comics have always been really well drawn on the cover, but the interior art's always been a little bit to be desired. But it comes with the territory. You know, you don't have a lot of space to draw, or a lot of time rather, to draw a really detailed picture, because you have to turn out those pages. The old adage is a page a day when you're working on a comic, so that way if you're doing a 48-page comic, it'll be like a month and a half. If you're really quick, you could probably get it done a lot faster. But a friend of mine in Canada called Aishe Han, he actually did a comic in a week and had it printed for I believe it was Toronto Comic Con or Fan Expo. I can't remember what time it was, but I remember talking to him, and he was like, "Yeah, I pretty much did this like in a week." And my other buddy Jason Clark was just like, "Yeah, I was there when he did like the first page." So that just shows you some people are faster. I am more of a page, maybe page and a half when I did comic pages. So. But yeah, you don't really have a lot of time. But anyway, his comic, Vagabond, every page looked like a cover. You can rip out a page and it looks amazing. So I really got a lot of inspiration from that. And then there was another book called Dima. I think it only had like 4 issues, from Dreamwave, which was like an offshoot of Image Comics. They closed, unfortunately. But they did do a couple Turtles books as well. But Dreamwave, shuttered their doors. I want to say early 2000s. But that was a really big inspiration for me. Shidima was what, that art style and the way the story was told was what really made me want to pursue making my own story. Because as a kid, I always wanted to draw for an established character. Or story, like your Supermans or Batmans. But Shidima was the first time that I was like, oh, this is creator owned. This is a self-contained story. There's not like a million books you have to buy to follow the story. And that was one of the biggest things that off-put me about DC and Marvel is, yeah, you could work on Superman, but at the time there was 4 different Superman books. There was Action Comics, Superman, Man of Steel, and then I think the 4th one was Adventures of Superman. Excuse me. So, that was a lot of different Superman stories going on off at once. And, when you're a kid, you don't really have a lot of spending money. You'd have to pick and choose which Superman book you wanted to read. And I always tend to gravitate towards Action Comics, just because my Death of Superman run I picked up a lot of the Action Comics, and those were the ones that I really enjoyed. And when the New 52 came out, the Action Comics was actually like a prequel to Superman, so I thought that was cool. But it was off-putting because, especially if you want to cater this to the younger audience, you want to have it accessible. And I'm not talking about kids, I'm talking about like, pre-teens and teenagers, because they're the ones that are really going to understand a story. When I was a younger kid, I would pick up a comic and I'm like, I don't know what the hell's going on. So I wanted to have something more, focus on a certain age range. So that's why Shidima was like that first inspirational book for me. And Vagabond, of course, but Vagabond was like aiming really high. It was like Kim Jong-gi style. I don't think I'm ever going to get to that point, so let me focus maybe in the middle here. And, I feel like it was a big inspiration for me. Another inspiration as far, so I did comics, video games. Third inspiration in movies, I'm a huge fan of 80s, I call them cheeseball sci-fi. So, I love Tron. And then I love Buckaroo Banzai. There was a lot of weird movies too, like The Wraith with Charlie Sheen. Those weird movies, to me, was way more interesting than the crap that was coming out at the time. And of course, comedies. I love Police Academy. So my sense of humor is very crude because of the movies that I grew up with. Dumb and Dumber, of course. But those movies inspired me to kind of have a weird sense of storytelling, but at the same time, up the weirdness to 11. And I think that's why the book I'm creating, Midnight Eye, has a serious subject matter, but there's a goofiness factor to it, and I didn't want to alienate anybody. I've always loved the occult and talking about monsters and religion, not in a divisive way. I wanted to talk about religion and like, yeah, this is pretty absurd. Let's explore it. So that's why I chose Midnight Eye, because Midnight Eye, with Midnight Eye, I could be as weird as quirky, but at the same time have somewhat of a positive message, and throw in my comedy, throw in all my inspiration. Like my main character is kind of like a amalgamation of like all the people I've looked up to in my life, like my dad, Bruce Lee, even a little bit of Ip Man. But Ip Man, I kind of based the other character, Kato, on. He's like the teacher, really wise. So that's why the story has a lot of things where I'm honoring the things that I've grown up with and really enjoyed. So another inspiration is music. I love Daft Punk, Justice, Eiffel 65. I know, as corny as they were, I really love that music. I spent so many nights drawing to Europop and Contact, Around the World, Discovery, Daft Punk. Those albums pretty much fueled my art nights. I remember when DSL was like first coming out. Man, I'm making myself sound old, and it really doesn't feel like it was that long ago. But DSL was like a thing, and at the time we only had AOL at my house, so that was like 56K. And my friend's like, yeah, dude, you can download any song you want. And I remember the first thing I downloaded was Daft Punk, Aerodynamic, and I think it was the whole album. I think it was the whole Discovery album. But yeah, I remember like putting that into like my crappy 2 gigabyte. I don't even think it was 2 gigabytes. I think it was like 256 megabyte crappy little MP3 player, and I remember I wrote that out, and then I burned the CD and used the old Sony Walkman. So those were the days, but those serve as like my huge inspiration at the time. I really loved Daft Punk, anything electronic. I loved the rock and roll too, but they were more of my like workout music. They weren't my drawing music. My drawing music was definitely electronic. And then when trance hit the scene, Armin van Buuren, Tiesto, those things really drove me too. Just creatively, I love trance music, especially progressive trance, because you really do get into a trance. You kind of like go into another world, and really enjoy that. As far as inspiration, I would say wrestling and martial arts were big inspirations for me, but wrestling was huge, because as a kid, it's like real life superheroes come to life. So that was a big inspiration, and back in the Monday Night Wars, that was huge too. So I really enjoyed having those outlets and being able to get a lot of inspiration from all these different places. But I'd like to hear what you guys, guys and gals, have gotten inspiration from. It could be anything, but inspiration is huge. Without inspiration, you don't know where to go as far as finding your own voice. It's not straight up copying someone, but trying to find your voice in your style. You kind of have to find that well of inspiration. And to me, it's the movies. And also, I forgot to talk about history. I love history. Greek mythology. I like World War I, World War II history. I could watch those documentaries all night. But those were huge inspirations as well. And I try to cover a little bit of history in my story because, like I said in the last podcast, being able to take time to do something, you want to be learning when you're doing it. And I feel like if I'm learning when I'm doing something, I'm not really wasting time. Another big inspiration for me would have to be, this is going to sound really weird, is board games. I used to play a lot of board games with my mom and my dad and my little brother and stuff like Parcheesi, because what kind of evolved me into getting into strategy. And I've always been a big fan of strategy. So when strategy games came out, like Risk and stuff like that, I enjoyed that too. But those kind of helped me figure out what's the strategy I'm going to take, how am I going to do it. Other big inspirations, books. I love reading. My thing was in school, the stuff they made us read always sucked. Like Shakespeare, I cannot get into Shakespeare. And then Mark Twain, I'm not really into that. The stories that I loved was like the Iliad, Homer's, the Odyssey. I loved reading about vampires and Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. Those are the kind of things I like. And then I love nonfiction, like Elie Wiesel, The Night, and then Day, which was sort of the sequel of what happened to him during that time. But stuff like that, I really got a lot of inspiration from. But I'd like to hear what you guys and gals find inspiration from. So this is your chance to leave in the comments down below what inspires you to do whatever you like to do. So if you're really into makeup, into crafting, even if you're a car mechanic, what inspires you? Because I know, like my dad was a mechanic, so he'd always get me to try to fix cars with him, and I learned the basics, but it just wasn't my forte. But he was really very mathematically inclined, so I know that what inspires him is math and measurements and all that quote unquote fun stuff. I am not very mathematically inclined. I'm more of a social studies science nerd. So that's where a lot of inspiration, and even education wise, I know people didn't like being in school, but everyone does have their favorite subjects, and mine was social studies and science, obviously art, but I got a lot of inspiration from science class, learning about cells and bacteria, stuff like that. Another thing that inspires me nowadays is my kids, because when I was younger, I wasn't thinking about the kid perspective because I always felt like a kid, but just being around my kids a lot, they are goofballs just like me, so they kind of inspire me to make more stories that are fun and quirky. I've always had a fun, quirky side, but just they up it to a whole new level. Especially my little one, she is a goofball. You've probably seen her in my live streams. She's really I'm not gonna say weird, because she's not weird. She's just she's unique, and it's just like the kids I used to teach. They're all very unique, and they're it's like the kids say the darndest things type thing, where it's like, man, the stuff that comes out of their mouths, you know. And then you think about it, when you were a kid, you probably said some pretty dumb stuff too. So I find it entertaining, and it inspires me to make more quirky characters and have fun. As far as concepting goes, when I concept, I get a lot of inspiration from different areas. Like when I draw a new character, I'm always thinking about what's the focal point of the character, and you know, what I'm gonna base that character on, how the character's gonna work. So pretty much that's all my inspiration is kind of put into in a nutshell. But like I said, I want to hear what you guys have to say. I'm going to leave the video here just so you can watch the end of Vega being finished here. I will speed it up just so that you know, you're not just looking at me drawing with music playing in the background. It's going to be sped up a little bit, so a little more to watch, but there's only a couple minutes left. So thank you so much for watching, and like I said, I want to hear what you guys have to say, so leave it down in the comments down below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and as always, don't forget to keep it over 9,000. Take care.